The sunlight kissed the grand estate, turning the cobblestone paths golden. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos clinked their champagne glasses. They spoke of yachts, hedge funds, and Europe's finest resorts. But no one noticed the sleek black car that had just arrived, until Michael Carter, the groom, opened the door and out stepped Evelyn Carter, his grandmother. Her silver hair curled perfectly, her navy blue dress modest but elegant. She smiled softly as she looked out over the crowd, but no one smiled back. Have you ever walked into a room full of people and felt completely invisible? What did you do? As Evelyn gracefully walked through the crowd, she passed by Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother, who held a glass of wine and a sharp tongue. Without even lowering her voice, Victoria leaned toward a cousin and said, "Some people just don't know the difference between elegance and effort." A few snickers followed. Evelyn heard it, but she didn't flinch. Her back stayed straight, her steps never slowed. Dignity wasn't in the dress, it was in the walk. Richard Montgomery, the bride's father, gave Evelyn the kind of greeting one might offer a distant staff member. A curt nod, no smile, no handshake, no warmth. He turned his attention quickly back to his conversation about real estate portfolios in Singapore. Evelyn stood there for a moment, then smiled mostly to herself and moved on. Michael, watching from afar, clenched his fists. But Evelyn simply whispered to him, "Let them be. The lesson is already writing itself." The table Evelyn was assigned to sat near the edge of the reception. Polished, perfect, but far from the spotlight. She sat gracefully, folding her hands in her lap. When she tried to greet her tablemates, their replies were clipped. Some turned their chairs ever so slightly away. When she reached for an hors d'oeuvre from a passing tray, Victoria scoffed loud enough for her to hear ... "There for the guests." Evelyn's hand paused ... then calmly withdrew. But not before Michael saw it all. Michael turned to his bride, Olivia, eyes filled with frustration. "Your mother just humiliated my grandmother." Olivia bit her lip. Her eyes darted toward the guests, the cameras, the wedding planner adjusting table flowers. "Not now, Michael, please." He stared at her. That silence hurt more than the insult. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder again. "Some truths need an audience before they teach." Richard Montgomery, in the center of his high-powered circle, chuckled loudly. "Traditions change, you can't expect all of them to be relevant anymore." Everyone laughed even though the joke wasn't funny. But Evelyn, sitting quietly nearby, knew what he meant. Some traditions were too black, too working class, too humble. Michael glanced at her, expecting outrage. Instead, she calmly sipped her tea. "He thinks he's refined," she whispered, "but all I see is someone afraid of being seen." Later, a woman commented to Evelyn about the challenge of managing wealth. Evelyn smiled softly. "True wealth," she said, "is measured in how you treat people when you think you don't need anything from them." The woman blinked. Didn't know whether to feel insulted or inspired. A man at another table sneered. "Humble beginnings are overrated." Evelyn replied, "Funny. Most great things started there, but still." The Montgomerys weren't listening. Not yet. At the edge of the reception, a sharply dressed older gentleman sat quietly alone, tailored suit, calm eyes. He wasn't drinking, just observing. He saw the glances, the scoffs, the deliberate cold shoulders. He saw Evelyn and she saw him too. Just one nod, no words exchanged. But something passed between them, recognition. As the reception swirled on in sparkling chaos, the event coordinator took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome someone whose name echoes across industries, philanthropy, and global leadership." Everyone leaned in. Victoria adjusted her makeup. Richard sat up straighter. Olivia smiled, assuming this was their moment of prestige. Michael narrowed his eyes. But Evelyn? She just placed her napkin beside her plate. She already knew. The older gentleman, elegant, powerful, stood up. Whispers filled the air. He walked toward the center stage. But then he turned, not toward the mic, Not toward the bride and groom. He walked directly to Evelyn Carter and bowed. Madame Carter, it's been too long. Silence gripped the garden. Victoria dropped her wine glass. Richard froze. Evelyn simply smiled. William, she said, you haven't changed a bit. It took the Montgomerys a moment, but then the name hit them like a freight train. William Carter, not just any guest, not just rich. A billionaire industrialist, a world-shaping philanthropist. And he had just bowed to the woman they'd ignored all night. The same woman they treated like decoration. Gasps swept the garden. And Olivia's parents began to sweat beneath their designer silk. William turned to the microphone, still standing beside Evelyn. Many of you know me as a businessman, an innovator. But I would be nothing if not for this woman right here. Guests stared. Madame Carter didn't just build wealth. She built legacies. She funded scholarships when no one believed in me. She broke barriers so others could walk through freely. Mouths opened, hearts cracked. The woman they'd shoved to the corner had built empires. William spoke with a kind of reverence that stripped every title in the room bare. While some build mansions to prove they've arrived, she built opportunities so others could rise. Evelyn remained seated, her gaze steady. She didn't bask in the spotlight. She didn't gloat, she simply nodded. Because truth doesn't need to shout when it's lived with quiet power. Victoria Montgomery, pale now, leaned toward Evelyn with a trembled laugh. Oh, we had no idea, truly, if you'd told us earlier. Evelyn raised one hand gently. Not rude, but final. There was nothing to say. A person's worth isn't in what they tell you. It's revealed in how you treat them before you know who they are. Victoria's smile faded. No retort, just realization. Richard, ever the businessman, stood and extended his hand. Madame Carter, perhaps we could speak. Network, collaborate. Evelyn looked at his hand, then turned away. Effortlessly, powerfully. Not out of spite, but out of principle. It was a dismissal that echoed louder than any insult ever could. Within minutes, guests began migrating quietly, respectfully toward Evelyn's table. People who had ignored her now wanted to greet her. CEOs, judges, professors. One woman whispered, I had no idea she was. Another corrected her. She was always someone, we just refused to see. Evelyn remained gracious but distant. She wasn't collecting apologies. She was watching the room finally learn. All evening, Michael had bit his tongue, but now he stepped forward. His voice calm, measured, funny, isn't it? You worried about how she dressed, where she sat, whether she belonged. But the only person in this room who built something that actually matters was her. Victoria flinched. Richard's jaw tightened. Michael didn't care anymore. You didn't just disrespect my grandmother. You disrespected greatness wearing grace. Olivia stood beside Michael, her eyes wide with tears. She looked at Evelyn. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have spoken up. I should have said something sooner. Evelyn nodded gently. Silence is natural at first. But change isn't made by those who stay comfortable. Olivia nodded. I'll prove I'm not my mother. Not her arrogance, not her ignorance. As the music resumed, Evelyn didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't parade around with William. She didn't deliver a triumphant speech. She simply sat, eating her dessert, sipping her tea, speaking to one guest at a time with kindness, not vengeance. Because real class doesn't need an audience. The Montgomerys sat stiffly at their table. The same table that once commanded the room. Now, no one cared. The laughter had faded. The conversations swirled elsewhere. They were no longer the elite, just exposed. For the first time, they weren't powerful. Just loud people in expensive clothing, and that silence, it was deafening. The Montgomerys didn't know what to do with themselves anymore. Victoria, once the star of every social gathering, now avoided eye contact. Richard, whose handshake once meant contracts and influence, found himself ignored. Their table, once surrounded, was now a lonely island. No one whispered to them anymore. Because the whispers were all about Evelyn, Victoria stared at her and touched wine glass. Her reflection shimmered, distorted, unfamiliar. "Have I really become that woman?" she muttered under her breath. She looked across the garden at Evelyn, speaking kindly, laughing gently with guests. No makeup trick, no diamond earring could fake that kind of elegance. "I built a life on prestige," she whispered to Richard. "And tonight, I saw what true power looks like, and it doesn't wear my name." Evelyn wasn't basking in a redemption arc. Because she had never fallen, she had nothing to prove. She had lived her truth long before anyone realized it was worth noticing. "They think this is my moment of triumph," she chuckled softly to William. "But I've been triumphant for decades. They're just now catching up." The band played softly, the servers refilled glasses. But something had shifted. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a quiet funeral for a false identity. The Montgomerys' illusion of superiority had died publicly, irreversibly. Guests weren't mourning, they were relieved. The room had made space for something real. He looked at her, she looked at him, neither smiled. But something deeper passed between them. Understanding. Olivia squeezed his hand. "You warned me about them," her eyes said. "And now I believe you." He kissed her temple gently. "No, I told you so." No triumph, just unity. A guester woman in a satin blue gown approached Evelyn. She bowed her head. "I laughed at a joke earlier," she whispered. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything." "I'm sorry." Evelyn touched her hand. "Thank you for telling the truth." "That's how change begins." The woman wiped a tear. It wasn't just the Montgomerys learning tonight. William looked at Evelyn as the sun began to dip. "You know," he said, "they will tell stories about tonight." "About you." Evelyn nodded. "Then I hope they tell it right. Not about me being rich, not about me being powerful, but about what happens when you stand tall in silence and still don't bend." All evening, Olivia had seen Evelyn through the lens of discomfort. Now she saw something else. A force, a history. A woman who had lived through storms and chose peace every time. She walked over. "Mrs. Carter," she began. "Please," Evelyn said, smiling gently. "Call me Grandma. We'll build something better together." From across the garden, Victoria saw Olivia hug Evelyn, laugh with her, walk away from the Montgomery table towards something real. And suddenly, Victoria felt what she feared most. Irrelevance, not because she lost wealth, but because her daughter had gained clarity. As the night wrapped up, the crowd began to disperse. Photos were taken, gifts exchanged. But the one image people couldn't forget was Evelyn Carter sitting quietly in her chair, dessert in front of her, grace in her posture, and wisdom in her silence. She had never raised her voice, but she had taught everyone something they'd remember forever. Richard Montgomery stood alone in the library of the estate. Lights dimmed. The evening was over. The whispers were gone. But Evelyn Carter's voice, quiet, sharp, precise, echoed in his mind. "Worth is revealed in how you treat others." He looked at his reflection in the tall mirror. Powerful, yes. But proud of himself. He didn't know anymore. Victoria sipped cold wine in the now empty garden. She had spent her whole life curating an image. A perfect daughter, a perfect family, a perfect event, and yet, one woman in a navy blue dress had shattered that illusion without even trying. "You can't fix this with thank you notes," she whispered to herself. She was right. Michael watched Olivia from the balcony. She was on the phone thanking vendors, helping guests find lost items, laughing softly with bridesmaids. She looked radiant, but what mattered most was what she'd said to Evelyn. Our marriage won't be built on ignorance, and he believed her. Because he had seen her choose character over comfort. Back in her small, ivy-covered home, Evelyn sat by the window with a cup of tea. She smiled, not because she had proven anything, but because her grandson had grown into the kind of man who didn't flinch when the world flinched at him. They'll remember the lesson she said aloud, whether they liked it or not. Over brunch, the Montgomery house was silent. Olivia finally spoke. "I'm sorry, but I'm not going to excuse last night. We hurt someone who deserved respect from the start." Victoria looked down. Richard cleared his throat but said nothing. "If you want a relationship with me and Michael, it has to be real, not curated." Throughout the week, guests who had attended the wedding shared what happened. But not about the flowers, not about the food. They spoke of Evelyn Carter, the woman we all overlooked turned out to be the most important person there. She said more with her silence than some people say in a lifetime. A new kind of legend had begun. A popular magazine reached out to Evelyn through William's assistant. "We'd like to do a feature on your life." Evelyn declined. "No need, my life speaks loud enough." But she wrote a letter, one that William later read aloud at a university graduation. Kindness doesn't mean weakness, and humility is not an apology for being great. A professor at a law school assigned his students to write an essay. Who is Evelyn Carter, and what does her silence teach us about justice? A high school teacher shared the story with her students under the title, "The Quietest Person at the Party." Evelyn's name was never on the invitations, but it was now on minds and hearts. On their honeymoon, overlooking the ocean, Olivia leaned into Michael's chest. "When we have children," she said, "I want them to grow up knowing people like your grandmother. Not just reading about them." Michael kissed her forehead. "We'll raise them with truth, not performance." Evelyn sat at her writing desk, pen in hand. She wrote a letter to her late husband. "You would have loved seeing Michael this strong. He stood by me like you used to. And Olivia, she's learning, she's trying. We may not always be seen at first, but eventually, character will always rise." She folded the letter, placed it in a book, and smiled. A week later, Olivia knocked on Evelyn's door, not with flowers, not with guilt. Just presence. They sat together in silence at first. No need for performances. Then Olivia asked, softly, "Would you teach me about your life, about what I've missed?" Evelyn looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. "Let's start with the silence. That's where everything hides." Michael and Olivia sent out handwritten cards for a small, intimate dinner. One envelope arrived at the Montgomery home. Victoria opened it. Inside was a note. "You're welcome to come if you come as yourself." No titles, no social masks, just real conversation. Victoria stared at it for a long time. Her fingers trembled. Not out of anger, out of fear. Richard stood in his office, surrounded by his degrees and awards. But they suddenly felt silent. He whispered to no one. "All my life, I believed the room answered to me, but I never stopped to ask, did I deserve to be in that room in the first place?" The mirror offered no reply, just reflection. Evelyn was invited to speak not at a gala, not at a boardroom, but at a shelter for teen girls. She shared her story simply, her voice soft. "They said I didn't belong, but I built something so strong. They now sit quietly in my shadow." The girls clapped, not because she was famous, but because she was familiar. At the dinner table with Michael and Evelyn, Olivia cleared her throat. "Grandma Carter," Evelyn looked up. "I need to say it, I was wrong, not just silent. Not just passive, wrong, and I don't want your forgiveness. I want your example." Evelyn reached over, took her hand. "You already chose it, dear. That's how I knew. No designer bag, no entourage, just her." She arrived at Evelyn's doorstep, nervous, eyes tired. When Evelyn opened the door, neither of them smiled. Victoria said only, "I'd like to understand. If you'll let me." Evelyn nodded, stepping aside. "Then take off your coat. It's heavy with things you don't need here." The meal was simple: roasted vegetables, spiced rice, warm bread. No one talked about businesses or net worth. They talked about being overlooked, about how silence hurts more when it comes from family. Evelyn didn't lecture, she just shared stories. And for once, Victoria didn't try to control the narrative, she just listened. He drove by Evelyn's house that night. Parked across the street. Watched shadows of conversation flicker inside the windows. He couldn't bring himself to knock. Not yet, but for the first time in years. He sat in silence with his regrets, and that was a beginning. Michael and Olivia planted a small memory garden at the estate. They placed a bench near a lilac tree and named it the Evelyn Grove. A plaque read, "Grace sits here." No last names, no titles, just roots. Because this time, their future would not forget the woman their past ignored. The breeze moved through her silver curls. The tree whispered above her. She wasn't waiting for admiration. She wasn't mourning what had happened. She was simply breathing. And in that breath lived 3 generations of change. "I didn't need a microphone," she whispered. "I just needed a seat they couldn't ignore forever." Months passed. One morning, Olivia placed Michael's hand on her stomach and whispered, "You're going to be a father." Michael froze, then smiled. His first words weren't about names or colors. "I hope they grow up like grandma." Olivia nodded. "And I hope they never have to see the world she didn't unless they're the ones changing it." When Michael told her the news, Evelyn just stared. Then tears fell, not of fear, not of nostalgia, but of hope. "Another Carter," she whispered. "And maybe this one enters a world that doesn't ask who they are before offering love." Weeks later, Evelyn received a package. Inside, a hand-crocheted baby blanket, no note, no explanation. Just a simple label for the little one. Evelyn smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was effort, and sometimes that's where redemption begins. When Olivia went into labor, family arrived quickly. Michael held her hand. Evelyn stood quietly near the window. Richard, he came, but couldn't walk through the door. Instead, he sat in the lobby. Holding a small, wrapped teddy bear. He never gave it to anyone, but he was there. And that was more than before. She had Evelyn's eyes, she had Michael's hands. And when Olivia looked down at her daughter, she whispered the name. Grace, because that's what had saved them. That's what had taught them, and that's what the world needed more of. Tiny fingers curled around her wrinkled ones. Evelyn didn't cry this time, she just closed her eyes. "I held the line," she whispered, "so this one could walk through the door already open." Michael watched her. Olivia wiped a tear. "No more battles today, only love." They framed it, Evelyn, Michael, Olivia, baby Grace. No formalities, no power symbols. Just warmth, arms intertwined, smiles soft and full. Underneath, Olivia wrote one word, beginning. Years passed quickly. Grace grew into a curious child. One afternoon, Evelyn walked slowly with her through the grove they once built. "You see that bench?" she asked. "That's where I sat when people finally saw me." Grace tilted her head. "Why didn't they see you before?" Evelyn smiled. "Because sometimes, darling, people wear their fear like glasses." One crisp morning, Evelyn passed in her sleep. Peaceful, no pain, no words left unsaid. In her drawer was a sealed envelope. It simply said, "For Grace, when she's ready." Grace opened the letter on her 16th birthday. Inside, a photo of Evelyn at her wedding. A dried lilac leaf, a note. "The world won't always be kind, but you can be. And in doing so, you become the strongest person in every room. Love, Grandma E." Grace folded the paper and smiled through tears. On graduation day, Grace Carter stood before her school, valedictorian, scholarship winner. The girl with the name everyone knew but didn't always understand. She unfolded a single note and began her speech. "This isn't about success. It's about sight," my grandmother once said. "You can only change a room after it stops ignoring you." The auditorium was silent, listening. Now older, slower, and quieter, Victoria sat alone, no pearls, no staff. Just her watching Grace speak with the clarity she never had. And for the first time, Victoria didn't envy the spotlight, she admired it from the shadows. After Grace's graduation, Michael found a letter on their porch. It was from Richard. Handwritten, honest. I built empires but failed at building decency. Your mother did what I couldn't. Your daughter is who I wish I had become. No signature, just a man still learning. Michael and Olivia reopened the Evelyn Carter Initiative, a scholarship fund, a mentorship program, a storytelling platform for voices once ignored. Grace became its youngest ambassador. You don't have to be loud to matter. You just have to stand where people are afraid to look. Visitors came every spring. Some sat and prayed, others cried. A few whispered apologies to a woman long gone yet never forgotten. On the bench, a new engraving. She taught us how to sit in silence until the room listened. And next to it, a quote from Grace: respect isn't inherited. It's earned by how you carry the weight of being unseen. At a university event, Grace was asked to headline a global summit. She politely declined. Instead, she sat in a circle with 6 high school girls from underfunded schools. The world already hears too much from the top. Let's start by listening from the bottom. One girl asked, "What made you brave?" Grace smiled. "I was raised by someone who was treated small but never acted like it." Do we overvalue the stage and undervalue the circle? Where do real revolutions begin? Years passed. One day, at a wedding much like her parents', Grace was introduced to a crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Grace Carter, community architect, youth advocate, and founder of Carter and Grove. She walked in, the room didn't pause, it rose. People didn't whisper now, they leaned in. At the 20-year commemoration of Evelyn's passing, Grace stepped to the podium. No notes, just memory. She was not just my grandmother. She was the quiet in the storm, the silence that roared, the patience that outlasted arrogance. She didn't change the world by shouting, she changed it by never bowing. In the heart of the Montgomery estate, now converted into a public leadership center, there's a grand hall. Its name? The Evelyn Carter Room. A plaque at the entrance reads, "Once overlooked, now unforgettable." And every year, students gather here not for fashion, but for truth. In the end, Evelyn Carter became a story passed down in silence. Not because people forgot, but because silence was how she changed the world. One act of grace, one decision to stay kind. One moment of dignity that echoed louder than any insult. She didn't need revenge, she needed only time. Because time always tells the truth. What story will they tell about you when you're no longer in the room?